everyone she loved. She has ruled kingdoms. She has commanded armies. She has outlived every single one of her enemies, except one. And now she is naked, stripped completely bare in front of a jeering crowd of thousands. Soldiers, peasants, nobles, priests, all of them watching, all of them laughing, all of them looking at this 70-year-old woman's body while she stands in chains, waiting to find out how she is going to die. The year is 613. The place is a field outside the city of Renève, in what is now eastern France. And the woman standing naked in that field is Queen Brunhilde of Austrasia, one of the most powerful rulers in European history, a woman who shaped the politics of an entire continent for nearly half a century. What they are about to do to her will take 3 days. 3 days of systematic humiliation designed not just to kill her, but to destroy everything she represented. 3 days that the chroniclers of the time recorded in detail because they wanted future generations to know what happens to women who accumulate too much power. 3 days that I am going to tell you about right now, because what happened to Brunhilde reveals something deeply disturbing about human nature that we still have not reckoned with. But here is what I need you to understand first. Brunhilde was not a villain. She was not a monster. The crimes she was accused of, the murders and conspiracies and dark deeds that her enemies attributed to her, most of them were invented after her death to justify what was done to her. The real story is far more complicated, far more tragic, and far more relevant to our world today than you might expect. Because what happened to Brunhilde was not justice. It was revenge. It was the final act in a blood feud that had consumed 2 families for 46 years. It was what happens when powerful men decide that a powerful woman has lived too long and accumulated too much influence and needs to be made an example of. And the way they chose to make that example is something I have never been able to forget since I first learned about it. Stay with me, because I am going to tell you the whole story, not just what they did to her at the end, but how she got there, who she was, what she built, what she lost, and why her final hours were designed to be the most degrading public spectacle that anyone in 6th century Europe had ever witnessed. This is the story of Queen Brunhilde, and I promise you, once you know what I am about to tell you, you will never forget her either. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what happened to Brunhilde at the end without understanding who she was at the start. She was born around 543 in the Visigothic kingdom, which covered most of what is now Spain and southern France. Her father was King Athanagild, which made her a princess from birth. But being a princess in the 6th century did not mean fairy tales and ball gowns. It meant you were a political asset to be married off to whoever would bring your family the most advantage. When Brunhilde was about 23 years old, her father arranged her marriage to Sigebert I, King of Austrasia. Austrasia was one of the Frankish kingdoms that had emerged from the collapse of the Roman Empire, covering roughly what is now northeastern France, Belgium, and western Germany. It was a wealthy kingdom, a powerful kingdom, and Sigebert was considered a good match. But here is the first thing you need to understand about Brunhilde. She was not just beautiful, she was brilliant. The chronicles describe her as exceptionally educated, fluent in multiple languages, deeply versed in Roman law and administration. At a time when most royalty could barely read, Brunhilde was a scholar, and she was about to enter a world that had no idea what to do with a woman like her. She married Sigebert in 567. By all accounts, it was a genuine love match, not just a political arrangement. Sigebert was reportedly captivated by her intelligence and her beauty. They had children together. They ruled together. For a brief moment, Brunhilde had everything, and then her sister was murdered. Brunhilde's younger sister, Galswintha, had been married to Sigebert's brother, King Chilperic of Neustria. It was supposed to be another advantageous match, another alliance between kingdoms. But Chilperic had a mistress, a former servant named Fredegund. And Fredegund did not appreciate being set aside for a foreign princess. Within a year of the wedding, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. Everyone knew who was responsible. Fredegund made no real effort to hide her involvement, and Chilperic, rather than punishing his mistress, married her, made her his queen, rewarded her for murdering Brunhilde's sister. I want you to imagine what that felt like. Your baby sister, sent to a foreign kingdom to marry a man who turned out to be a monster, murdered in her own bed by a servant who wanted her position. And the man responsible not only faced no consequences, but elevated the murderer to royalty. This is where the blood feud began. This is the wound that would never heal. For the next 46 years, Brunhilde and Fredegund would be locked in a war that would consume their families, their kingdoms, and ultimately their lives. And I need to tell you something about Fredegund before we go any further, because understanding her is essential to understanding what eventually happened to Brunhilde. Fredegund was everything Brunhilde was not. Where Brunhilde was educated and noble-born, Fredegund had risen from nothing through manipulation, seduction, and murder. Where Brunhilde operated through law and administration, Fredegund operated through poison and assassination. The chronicles of the time describe Fredegund as perhaps the most ruthless woman in Frankish history, responsible for ordering the deaths of bishops, nobles, and even members of her own family when they became inconvenient. These two women hated each other with an intensity that is difficult to comprehend from our modern perspective. This was not a political rivalry. This was personal. This was blood, demanding blood. And for nearly 5 decades, that hatred would shape the destiny of Western Europe. But here is what I need you to understand. When the chroniclers wrote about these events, they were almost all men. Men who served the kings, who eventually won. Men who had every reason to portray Brunhilde as a villain and Fredegund as merely a loyal wife defending her husband. The narrative that has come down to us is a narrative written by the people who destroyed Brunhilde, and we need to read it with that understanding. Because the Brunhilde who emerges from the more neutral sources, the administrative records and the legal documents and the building inscriptions, is very different from the monster her enemies described. That Brunhilde was a builder, a reformer, a ruler who maintained Roman roads and aqueducts, who patronized churches and monasteries, who tried to bring order and civilization to kingdoms that were sliding into chaos. That Brunhilde was a woman who did what she had to do to survive in a world that gave women almost no power, and who used what power she had to accomplish things that men would be celebrated for. But that is not the Brunhilde that history chose to remember. History chose to remember the version her enemies created. And what they did to her at the end was designed to make sure that their version would be the only one anyone would ever know. The wars between Brunhilde and Fredegund lasted for decades. Battles were fought. Territories changed hands. Children and grandchildren were drawn into a conflict that had started before most of them were born. Brunhilde's husband, Sigibert, was assassinated in 575, murdered by agents sent by Fredegund. Brunhilde was captured briefly but managed to escape. She remarried, was widowed again, and eventually became regent for her son Childebert II. This is where Brunhilde showed what she was truly capable of. As regent, she did not simply hold power until her son came of age. She wielded it. She formed alliances. She reformed the administration of her kingdom. She built infrastructure. She maintained the postal system that the Romans had created. She patronized the church and used it to extend her influence. She did everything that a king would have done, and in many cases did it better. The problem was that she was not a king. She was a queen, and queen regents were supposed to step aside when their sons grew up. Brunhilde did not step aside. Even after Childebert came of age, even after he married and had children of his own, Brunhilde remained the dominant force in Austrasian politics. When Childebert died in 596, Brunhilde became regent again. This time, for her grandsons, Theudebert and Theuderic, 2 kings now, 2 kingdoms, and 1 grandmother controlling both. This was unprecedented. This was dangerous. And this was when the nobility of Austrasia and Burgundy began to truly fear her. You have to understand, the Frankish nobility had power because the kings were weak. They had carved out their own territories, their own privileges, their own semi-independent domains. A strong king threatened all of that. And Brunhilde was not just a strong king, she was an intelligent one who understood Roman law and administration, one who might actually succeed in centralizing power